Welcome to Mesoscale News with Rebekah Jones, and today I am meeting with a scientist who has a new paper coming out about the human link to global coral bleaching events. And his name is Dr. Andrew Pershing. Doctor, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Rebecca. Thanks for having me on. Andy Pershing, I'm the Chief Program Officer at Climate Central. We're a climate science organization where we do actionable science that is meant to drive the public conversation. It's meant to be information that is useful for people to understand, the changing planet that we live on.
Awesome. And so the paper that you have coming out tomorrow at midnight, or will be no longer embargoed tomorrow at midnight, is about connecting the human influence or quantifying the human influence towards mass coral bleaching events, specifically since 1998, that we've observed on a global scale. And you do that, and you assert that for the most recent coral bleaching event starting in like 2018, and that's possibly still ongoing, it is entirely driven by global warming caused by human beings. Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. Coral reefs are live in very, very warm water, and so they're very sensitive to rising temperatures. And so we're able to calculate the risk that a coral reef faces from rising temperatures using a particular model that our colleagues at NOAA developed, years and years ago. So it's a very well-established model. What we did was to apply this model using our climate change attribution framework, where we can say, here's the temperatures for every reef around the world. Here's the temperature that we observed, and then translate that into risk. But we can also take the signal of climate change out of the data and say, what would the temperature have been without global climate change, without human-caused carbon emissions? And then look at the risk without that extra kick from climate change. And when we do that, we see that there would be almost no risk over this most recent event. It really is almost entirely human caused. There would be only a few places where you might see, some bleaching, but nothing that would be reef scale, nothing that would lead to, reef, coral mortality, which is what we've faced in the last event.
And these signatures correlate a lot with the El Nino Southern Oscillation cycles, correct?
So that's actually a really interesting part of our paper. For a long time, the first global mass coral bleaching event was in 1998, which coincided with one of the last super El Nino, like the super El Nino that we're thinking about this year. And so that definitely said put into the mindset of people that like these global events are triggered by El Ninos. But our work shows that even that 1998 event, while El Nino might have added some extra kick to the temperatures, if you hadn't had climate change, that event would not have led to bleaching. So El Nino on its own is not strong enough to create a mass coral bleaching event, and isn't really strong enough on its own to lead to dangerous conditions. It's really climate change that is causing the threat that the reefs are facing right now.
And for those who don't know, El Nino is a quasi-irregular upwelling of warm water in the Pacific Ocean that leads to a global shift in really all climate factors. For those of you on the East Coast and Gulf, you'll know that typically, though not always, creates too much wind shear for a lot of hurricanes to develop. Of course, it only takes one, and Hurricane Andrew hit in a El Nino year, so that's not a guarantee. But having a very strong El Nino, like we are anticipated to have this year, on top of ever rising temperatures, is the coral reefs show any kind of consistent recovery as these bleaching events become more frequent, which they have, and more intense.
Yeah, so I think this is the real challenge is, and this is why every tenth of a degree of climate change matters. So, at 1 degree Celsius, we're right now at a global average, over several years of about 1.3, 1.4 degrees Celsius. But, at 1 degree Celsius, we saw a number of places like in the paper we talk about the Chagos in the Indian Ocean, where it was subject to stressful bleaching temperatures and recovered. And that recovery probably it's selected for species on that reef or strains that were more resilient to rising temperatures. And so it was resilient to the next sort of set of stressful conditions, but then eventually that resilience runs out. And that's really what we're facing is that every tenth of a degree matters. So we can coral have some ability to adapt, they have some ability to adjust, but we're really outpacing that ability that these ecosystems have to keep up with the changes.
And that magnitude increasing over time certainly isn't going to help with the
Yeah.
latency period or a recovery period. One of the things that I work with Project Zero is specifically looking at sensitive reefs and building more climate adaptable reefs. For your paper, you mentioned one of the locations in India. Are there other areas that seem to be more resilient than others?
Yeah, so we didn't really look at that. We're looking at reef regions, not individual reefs, but these sort of large regions like the Caribbean, right? The Western Caribbean, like fairly large areas, and looking at their exposure to these stressful temperatures. And when we do that, we really see that it's just chronic stress all over the planet. There's a little more here, a little less there, but overall, we really are seeing across almost all of these places just very, very high risk from global climate change.
Yeah. And last year I attended the UN conference, ocean conference in Nice, France, and there was a huge emphasis that year on coral reefs because they play such a vital part of not just biodiversity on the planet, but their key role in fisheries maintenance, in our global, uh, basically food chain. And so, what you've looked at with human beings being the driving force behind this, are we in a place where, trying to say this in the most optimistic way, and I'll smile as I say it, to kind of alleviate some of that burden on you, but are we in a place where any kind of action that we take in the immediate future will be enough to remediate some of the damage that's been done? Because as a climate scientist who doesn't necessarily focus on corals, I know that we're locked into a certain level amount of sea level rise and ocean heat, that these are systems that operate on thousands of years. Are we in reach of being able to save coral reefs from additional mass die-offs?
And it's going to be really, really challenging, right? We're, you know, every degree, tenth of a degree matters. Every ton of CO2 that we put in the atmosphere matters. Every ton of CO2 that we put in the atmosphere just increases the risk to these systems and the pressure that they're under. We definitely expect that, in a world where we're starting to hit, 1.5 degrees Celsius, 2 degrees Celsius, which are the temperatures that we expect to hit on a global scale, over the next decade or two, that at those temperatures, it's very, very hard. And our study really, I think, reinforces this. It's very hard to imagine coral reefs thriving the way that we think of it. Coral will survive, right? A lot of the fish, a lot of the species will survive, but they'll be in little pockets here and there. And so the game, I think, is going to really be to like keep as many of those pockets as we can, so that when we do get warming under control, there's the ability for these ecosystems to rebuild and expand.
It's never good news when it comes to climate change, unfortunately. But thank you, Doctor, for taking the time to speak to me. And where can people learn more about this paper and about your work?
Sure. So the paper's published in Oceanography magazine, which is free, so you can find that online. And at Climate Central, we have a lot of resources for understanding how climate change is impacting land and the ocean. So you can go and look at maps of today's temperature in the air or temperature in the water, and look at how climate change has boosted those temperatures and made them more likely in most cases.
All right. Thank you again for joining us, and I look forward to whenever I get to interview next.
All right. Great to talk to you.